Fifth and the last thing that I'd like to present here, of course, is the most important perhaps vis-a-vis our uh, presence in this Western society, and that is how do we behave with non-Muslims when we live here. So you see, this has two elements. One of them is are certain verses of the Quran which seemingly tell us that we should not make friends with them, or we should be harsh with them. We should not initiate greetings or salutations with them. We cannot pray for their forgiveness, etc. So this is one category. And the second category is more social, and that is, for example, if we have uh, individuals who have a different sexual orientation, how should we behave with them? And I'm referring to the LGBTQ issue, which is so strong in the West everywhere. And because of the fact that this is an issue in which our Desi parents and we ourselves, I think, need to be educated, and we need to revisit our strategy. So I take a moment to talk about both these aspects of living in a society. So the first relates to certain religious precepts vis-a-vis non-Muslims, and the other relates to our social interaction with the people who have a different gender orientation. So, as far as these questions are concerned, which we look up in the Quran, and we find that it does seem from the Quran that there is a certain amount of harshness present in the Quran vis-a-vis non-Muslims. We know from the Quran, Surah Tawbah, it tells us that there are certain instances when you can chop off the head of non-Muslims, faqtulul mushrikeen. The words are very clear in the Quran that just kill these idolaters. Then we have the fact that you wage war with the Jews and Christians. Qatilul lazina la yu'minuna billahi wal yawmil akhir. Both these verses are in Surah Tawbah. Then again, we have this verse that Ya ayyuhal lazina amanu la tattakhizul yahuda wan nasara awliya, that do not take these Jews and Christians as your friends. And then we have again verses which say that do not pray for their forgiveness, don't stand on their graves, and they're not worthy of your forgiveness. Similarly, if you extend this and you go to Hadith literature, you'll find out that the Hadith literature tells us that non-Muslims cannot inherit from Muslims. For example, if a person converts in a family, if the father converts, he cannot inherit from the son if the son is still a non-Muslim, and vice versa as well. Then again, we have hadiths which tell us that we cannot say salam to non-Muslims, and at least not initiate salam to them. And if we do so, then we should not say walaikum assalam. All that we should say is walaikum. So this is one category. And if this is true, then obviously, I mean, it's so difficult to justify all these directives and not be angry and harsh with non-Muslims. I mean, if this is what the Quran's message is, then apparently there is very little that we can do, because if the Quran is asking us to be harsh and to be angry and to be in fact isolate ourselves from non-Muslims, then either there is something more to it that we are not understanding, or it's simple as that we should be. And you see, the likes of Osama bin Laden, Mullah Omar, Abu Bakr Baghdadi, all of them have basically drawn inspiration from these set of verses, which tell us to kill non-Muslims, which tell us to isolate ourselves from non-Muslims. And it's not just in the Western society; it's all over the world. It's a phenomena. It's all over the world, and it is because of this phenomena that you are witnessing this surge in Islamophobia. That you dread Islam because these Islamists, they are going to take over your country. They are going to kill you. They are going to just displace you from wherever you are. So it's such a huge, I would say, issue that this happened about a century ago in the United Kingdom in 1890s. So William Gladstone was a prime minister at that time, and he had the singular honor of becoming the prime minister of Britain for 4 times. So he was prime minister here 4 times, and he is said to have remarked in the Parliament, and he said that, look, as long as this book, and he was referring to the Quran, exists in our society, there cannot be world peace. We cannot live peacefully because this book incites Muslims against us. This book tells us that we have to be at variance with our non-Muslim brethren. And if it is here, then we can have of course, we can have no peace with them. And as I just said, that this was borne out exactly 100 years after William Gladstone perhaps passed away, that in 1994, maybe some of you do remember, when Osama bin Laden had not become prominent, he had actually quoted these verses of the Quran, some of these verses. For example, he said, "Faqatilu aymatul kufr." This is a verse from Surah Tawbah, which means that you kill these leaders of disbelief. And he said that, well, today these leaders of disbelief is the United States of America, USA. So I wage war against the USA. And this he actually had declared much earlier on, before those 9/11 attacks, 6 or 7 years before. But what the point that I'm making here is that he drew inspiration, or he cited the Quran and said that this is what the Quran tells me to do, and I'm going to do it. Now, in order to understand the Quran, we have to also realize that there are certain verses in the Quran which are the prerogative of the messengers of God. And these messengers of God were given the mission by the Almighty to create lesser days of judgment on the face of the earth in their own times, so that that greater day of judgment, which is going to take place for all of us, we don't lose sight of that. So as a result of that, people were punished and they were rewarded in this world in the era of God's messengers. But this era began with Adam and ended on Muhammad. So this is what we can call the prophetic era. The prophetic era in which the Quran was also revealed, by the way, is an era which speaks of messengers of God. It speaks of the fact that people who intentionally deny these messengers, they would be punished in this world for this denial, because this punishment is something which God is giving them through those messengers. But in the post-prophetic era, which is of course the era which is going to extend from Prophet Muhammad right up to the day of judgment, messengers of God no longer come, and hence the Almighty in this period does not directly punish people through his messengers, because of course in the era of the messengers, he gives them those miracles, he gives them those arguments in which they can communicate the truth to the ultimate extent. And in the terms of the Quran, this is called Itmamul Hujjah, which means that you communicate the truth to such an extent to the non-Muslims or to people around you that they are not left with an excuse to deny you. And if you do so, then the Almighty says that I'm going to punish you. So the punishments which are, or the harsh, I would rephrase my words, the harsh content of the Quran actually is an expression of these punishments which were meted out to non-Muslims of those times because of their intentional denial or their insurgency. And they do not relate in any way to the post-prophetic era. So if we understand that, we would come to realize that these verses have a specific context, and that context was, of course, as I said, found in the prophetic era, in which, because of the fact that they had intentionally denied, they had deliberately denied the truth, they were punished as a result of that. So today, when we read this verse that you do not make friends with Jews and Christians, we need to realize that the Jews and Christians which the Quran is talking about is totally different. They are totally different from the Jews and Christians of today. They were the Jews and Christians on whom the truth was unveiled by the messenger of God, and as a result, because they intentionally denied, they were punished. But that no longer applies. So the Jews and Christians of today are entirely a different category. They cannot be aligned with the Jews and Christians which are found in the Quran, the way it mentions that. The second element that I'd like to discuss before we open the floor for questions is regarding our integration in this Western society, regarding how we should behave as parents in a society which is increasingly being polarized, and a society in which the LGBTQ issue is something of it's like a sore issue, and it might be shoved down the carpet and not discussed, but the fact is that it is found writ large in every office, in every school, in every college, and you might not talk about it, but it's there in your mind. It really bothers us. So I think there are a couple of points that I'd like to make here to present my view regarding how we should tackle this issue when we are living in this Western society. The first thing that comes to my mind is that there are two big mistakes that are being made, one by the Western society and one by the Muslims. And first of all, we need to rectify these two mistakes and then move forward. So the mistake which the Western society is making here is that, let me just give you a brief introduction to that. And we know that living in the West, one of the greatest things that we have as an asset here is our freedom of expression. We have the right to form an opinion, isn't it? Everyone has that liberty, that freedom, that I have the right to differ with my brother, with my colleague, with my teacher, with my student, whatever. So this right of freedom of expression is not being granted by the champions of this to people who differ with them. So any person who differs with the West regarding the LGBTQ issue is actually looked upon as a person who is condemning them. He doesn't have, he has to hide his face in corners. He doesn't have the courage to even express that in words, otherwise he would be taken to task. So the first thing that we need to understand is that the Western society has actually gone to the other extreme. They were the champions of freedom of expression. They still are, isn't it? I mean, they give you this right to express whatever you feel is correct to your own self. But in the case of the LGBTQ issue, if Muslims present their reservations, if they differ with their view, they don't take it in the right way. And they don't grant them this freedom of expression that yes, they can differ with them. And they would say that, well, this is an issue in which you are attacking us, you are not allowing us to live. So I think the first thing that we perhaps need to uh, put across them is that, look here, this is an issue which is a point of difference between us. But that doesn't mean that we don't respect you. That doesn't mean that we don't respect your point of view. Yes, we have the right to differ. So let's agree to differ and grant us this right to have a different opinion. So I think this is one area in which the Western society we need to have that dialogue and tell them that you are crossing the limits and you're not allowing us to have our opinion and still exist in a peaceful way. The mistake that we Muslims are making, I'm talking in general, I mean, of course, there are exceptions, is that we have a very, hateful attitude toward this community. And I think this is not correct. So you see, all of them are human beings. Everyone has a right to live. If they have chosen a different sexual orientation, it is their choice. And this is something that we need to respect. And I'm going to give you an example from the Quran itself, and you'll realize that how tolerant God Himself is towards people who are divergent, people who are different in their approach. We know that polytheism or shirk is something which the Almighty says will never be forgiven. All other sins can be forgiven, but shirk or polytheism is not going to be forgiven. Isn't that so? And look what the Quran says about parents who are polytheists. The Quran tells the children of the parents who are polytheists that sahibhuma fid dunya ma'rufa. It doesn't say that run away from them. It doesn't say you condemn them. It doesn't say you start being angry with them. It says be kind to them and live with them the way you should live with ordinary parents in a way of kindness and magnanimity. So something which was so abhorrent to God that He said that He would not forgive that sin. But when, as parents, they were there, we were all told that, well, as parents, if they adhere to this creed, it's not that you have to be hateful to them. In spite of having following in this creed, you should be kind to them. So I think this is an example which tells us that the LGBTQ community, we would have our differences with them. Of course, all of us might will not agree with their orientation, but hating them is not the solution, or being angry with them is not the solution. They are equal creatures of God as we are. The judgment in this case should let it rest with God. Let God decide their fate and let God do whatever He wants to with them. As far as we are concerned, the element of hate that we have for them, or the element of hate that we teach our children to have for them, in my humble opinion, is not the right way, because this opportunity is given to God by every person. I was just giving this example the other day. There's this Satan worship cult that exists in this world even today. Satan worship still goes on, and it goes on unchecked. And I was just referring to the fact that look how magnanimous God is, that He allows all sorts of people to live on His earth, and He says, okay, you do what you like, and I'm going to take account from you one day whenever I think it's appropriate. He never checks them in the way, or He did not allow them to live in a forced way. So I think that if God is so tolerant of people the way they would like to adopt themselves to live, we too as Muslims, of course, we have a difference of opinion in this matter. But that difference of opinion does not mean that we should disrespect them, or we should show any disrespect. And I go one step ahead, and I say that as far as discrimination is concerned in this regard, that also should not be tolerated. For example, if the LGBTQ community has certain rights and certain human rights, and they would like those rights to be respected, I think I will stand with them that yes, they would have those rights, because as human beings, they have those rights. For example, if they have a quota or a certain segment in which they should have representation, just as ordinary people should have that representation, Just because they are different people, that orientation should not be taken away from, or that representation should not be taken away from them. In other words, if human rights are being compromised, then this is something that I would not agree with. Yes, my difference will be there, and again, here my insistence on the fact that we should recognize them as individuals does not mean that I agree with them. I mean, this is very important to understand, because people think that if I stand by them for their rights, it means that I am supporting them. No, that is not the case. What all that we are saying is that as individuals, as human beings, they have those human rights, and we would not agree with their orientation. So I think that this second element that we in which we should not show that hate towards our to this community is something that is very important.